good afternoon, everybody. Sorry to disturb those good conversations. We'll let you resume those in about an hour. So, welcome to the release of our 16th Regional History Series book, Bigwigs and Benefactors of the Pikes Peak Region. I'm Tim Blevins. I'm with Special Collections, which is the Pikes Peak Library District's Regional History and Genealogy Division. This Regional History Series book was managed and from beginning to end by our archivist, Heather Jordan. Say hi, Heather. So Heather Jordan was the lead editor of this book project, and which means she was the lead of the editorial team. She did the book layout, she did the illustration, she did the indexing, and she did the ebooks, and a lot of work. And the contributing authors and Heather and her team really did a fabulous job on this book. And it's something really for them to be proud of. And on reflecting on this accomplishment, I got some quotes from Heather. It's a lot more work than I thought. It's very time consuming. And it was very educational, and she really enjoyed it. So let's give everyone who had a hand in this a big hand. You may be aware that this is actually the third book that we have released within the past 8 months. In November, we released Massacre, Murder, and Mayhem in the Rocky Mountain West. In March, we released Disasters of the Pikes Peak Region. And so what we're trying to do is really concentrate our efforts on the backlog of our book publishing. And the objective is to be getting caught up. And so we're doing a pretty good job. By this time next year, we are really hoping to be caught up. To that effort, Special Collections Manager Tim Morris, there's Tim right here, and yeah, there's Tim. And Bill Thomas, our photo archivist in the back, let's give him a hand too. Both of them have undertaken the lead roles on other books that will be out probably about this time next year. And our objective is to get more staff trained to be able to do these books so that we can turn them out much more quickly because we can spread the effort out. And so that's our goal, and we're making progress. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Chief Librarian and CEO of Pikes Peak Library District, John Spears.
Thank you, Tim. I have a bit of a louder voice, I think. There's been a lot of applause given to a lot of incredible people in this library district, but there's one person that has not yet received applause, and it is someone who's done an incredible job for the Special Collections Department here. Someone who has really made it, I would say, probably one of the best Special Collections Departments at any public library in the United States, and that is Tim Blevins himself. Bigwigs and Benefactors is a book about some of the famous and unknown individuals and groups who contributed to make the Pikes Peak region truly what it is today, a great place to live. Many of you here contribute to our community as volunteers or with financial assistance, and I think there's one thing that we can learn from this book. It is that we can all be benefactors, that we can all make a difference in the community that we choose to live in. There's a few people and a few groups that I want to bring special attention to because they have been incredible benefactors for the Pikes Peak Library District. One, of course, is our board. And we're honored today to have two of our board members with us, our Vice President, Keith Clayton II, and our President, Kathy Grossman. They give their time, their knowledge, and their experience, and this library district would not be what it is without their efforts. Another group that I want to recognize is the Pikes Peak Library District Foundation. We would not nearly be the library that we are. Even the building that we are in today would not have been possible without the generosity of the benefactors that contributed to the foundation, and then in turn the foundation providing that money to the Pikes Peak Library District. This building, for instance, the 1905 Carnegie Library, was renovated and restored with the contributions of organizations and individuals. And that even went down to the smallest among us. A lot of the money that was raised for this renovation was actually raised by children who dropped their change into collection jars that were kept throughout the district. Being a benefactor, you don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be elderly. You can be poor and you can be 3 years old. Benefactor is a state of mind and it's a state of being. And this book recognizes that anyone amongst us can be a benefactor. One of the most important benefactors to this library, and especially to Special Collections, is a woman that we are incredibly grateful to have here today, and that is Helen McCaffrey. And she is here with her friends Nita and Nathaniel Peters. Among many things, Mrs. McCaffrey has helped to ensure that the annual Pikes Peak Regional History Symposium has been such a success. The contributions that Ms. McCaffrey has made to this library are legion, and she is truly an incredible woman, an asset to this library, and an asset to this community. So with that, I would now like to introduce the Vice President of the Pikes Peak Library District Board of Trustees, Keith Clayton II.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone who contributed to making this event possible. I'm pleased to be here and participate in this release by introducing our speaker, Joyce Lohse. Joyce combines journalism and genealogy to write award-winning historical biographies for Palmer Lake's Filter Press. Subjects for Joyce's biographies include Baby Doyle Tabor, General William Jackson Palmer, the unsinkable Molly Brown, and most recently, Spencer and Julie Penrose. Joyce's awards, and yet there are many, include Colorado Independent Publishers Association EV Awards, 2 Silver Willow Awards, and the Colorado Authors League Award. In 2008, she was also inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. Joyce's interest in Western history has led her to present about 200 programs, including 5 iterations of the Pikes Peak Regional History Symposia. While researching stories about Colorado pioneers, she enjoys lurking in libraries, something that I sometimes like to do myself, their archives and cemeteries. Joyce is excited and honored to bring the Penrose legacy home to the Penrose Library. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Joyce Lohse.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. We lived here from 1974 to 1992 before we succumbed to the lure of that big city up north. I want to thank a couple of people today, especially my husband, Don. He drove me down from Denver today. It was no easy task, and I was grateful to be able to sit in the passenger seat and watch the snow go by. So he does so many other things for me too, and we're the cliche family with the writer in it, with the cobwebs in the corner and the late dinners and that sort of thing. So I appreciate him. I also appreciate 2 people who have led me down the publishing road the last almost 2 decades. Doris and Tom Baker from Filter Press. Why don't you stick your hand up so people can see where you are? Thank you so much. We've done a lot of good work together. We've shared a vision, which is to preserve and share the stories of Colorado and Western pioneers, and they have published 7 biographies for me and showed me so many ways to bring forth my skills and share the stories with others. I also want to give a huge thanks to the Pikes Peak Library District on the same basis. I was invited into the History Symposium for the doctor's book quite a long time ago, and from then kind of snowballed into other areas and have really enjoyed my involvement. I feel like this program is just so incredibly such a jewel to be able to be involved with and to share with all of you. And I know how much history means to all of you, and that's why you're here. And you all are appreciated as well. So, beyond that, I think it's time to get down to business, something that this man would appreciate because he was a businessman. A friend of mine recently read my biography about Spencer Penrose and said, "Wow, that fellow led a fascinating life and had movie star looks to boot." I'd never thought about it that way. But he was a very natty dresser. He had that cocked eyebrow look that was very rakish looking, and he, of course, waxed the tips of his mustache, which was fashionable at the time. I don't know if he'd get away with it these days, but he was a good-looking fellow. So, I will be sharing with you his story, which I did at the symposium earlier, but we can go a little more deeply, I think, into some of the aspects of his story and maybe look at a couple of things that we might not have been able to go into previously, especially considering the fact that everywhere I turned when I was doing the research, I ran into legends and stories that you couldn't necessarily document, so I did my best to find the truth about them and include what could be documented and bypass the things that just didn't quite seem right. So, starting at the beginning, Penrose's family mainly consisted of men. Of course, he had a mother. She passed away in 1881 due to pneumonia. He was only 15 years old at the time, and the story is that he was alone in the house when she died, and it was very traumatic for him. Had a lifelong impact on him. He didn't like to be alone, and that carries on through his life in that he always surrounded himself with people that he could trust and work with, and just didn't like to go down the path by himself. His brother, he was midway in the lineup of brothers. He's the tall fellow right here. 3 of his brothers were older. They were high achievers. They went to Harvard and graduated with honors. And then along came Spencer. Expectations weren't as great for him. So he did the best he could, though. He did get into Harvard, and he developed some interests of his own. He was on the crew team, which his brothers had done, and he must have been fairly proficient because he was in the stroke position, which would have been this fellow here. The rowers all face backwards to the direction they're going, and then the fellow in the back watches where they're going and calls out orders and that sort of thing. So it was a fairly important position. The caption on this photo says, "Our crew in the 1884 class races." So that was one of his interests, and he did it for 3 years. Another interest was boxing. This is not a picture of Penrose boxing, but 2 fellows at the time he was in Harvard are showing basically what it looked like back then. And it's something that paid off well to him a couple of times further in his adult life. His other interest was drinking beer. According to legend, and this is often repeated, but I'm unable to document it, so I never published it, but I will share it with you here, is that he could drink a gallon of beer in 38 seconds. And he was quite proud of this fact, apparently, because he repeated the story often. Now, about scholastics. You don't go to Harvard without having some sort of ability in the scholastic area as well. This is a quotation from an essay that won an award before he graduated from Harvard. And it says, the fact is, one great man opens and prepares the way for many others. Thus, the influence of great men is continually multiplied and increased. This is a fairly lofty thought, and he obviously was fairly serious about this essay. So I have to believe that he had some sort of serious effort going into his studies. The legend here is that he graduated last in his class. And I actually got a hold of the archives at Harvard to look into this. And predictably, they said, we can't divulge that information. If you'd like to come out to Harvard and check it out, and I thought, I don't want to know that badly, but I thought I'd give it a shot. So I couldn't pursue that one. But he did graduate. He is listed in the Secretary's report of graduates from Harvard, and they proudly list him as a businessman who has accomplished great things, which he did later. So, moving along, Spencer Penrose came to Colorado Springs in 1892. He came by way of Las Cruces, New Mexico. After he graduated from Harvard, he stayed in Philadelphia, where his family lived, for a couple of years and worked in banks as a clerk. He was obviously kind of floundering around trying to find his way and what he was going to do with his diploma and so forth. He decided he wanted to go out west. He'd always talked about it. He even put down in the census records that his occupation was a rancher before he ever left Philadelphia. Optimistic fellow. So he went out to Las Cruces, started a produce business, and soon ran out of money. About that time, his brother Richard, who was a geological engineer, was in Colorado Springs meeting with Charles Tutt, who was a family friend from Philadelphia, who was looking into some mining concerns and needed some consultation with a metal or a mineral engineer. So he also mentioned that he had some business concerns up in Cripple Creek, where there were silver and gold booms going on, and he needed somebody reliable to run his business up there. Richard Penrose said, well, my brother is looking for work, and he's pretty dependable. I think you ought to check him out. So they invited Spencer to come up to Colorado Springs. Now the legend is Spencer Penrose got off the train, was all disheveled from the train ride and said, oh my gosh, I need to have a drink. Let's go out and have a drink, something like that. They went to the Cheyenne Mountain Country Club, and he got in a scuffle and punched somebody and got in big trouble and was sent to work in Cripple Creek. Well, I can't document that, but what I did learn was that the ledger entry for the Cheyenne Mountain Country Club on December 10th, 1892, said that Spencer Penrose came in the club as a guest of Charles L. Tutt, to whom he applied for a job. Penrose joined the club in January 93, a month later. And then he did get into a scuffle over a card game and busted up some furniture and was asked to leave the gentleman's club until he could improve his behavior. So he wrote the apologetic letters, and everything was turned his way then, and he was invited to come back, he and a couple other fellows. So it wasn't quite as bad as the more colorful version, you might say. But he did go to Cripple Creek. Now, This cabin is interesting for a couple of reasons. This picture appeared in the Gazette on July 27th, 1924. It says, "Here is the first cabin occupied by Charles L. Tutt and Spencer Penrose in the Cripple Creek district. It will be observed that they had a large supply of wood on hand. Harry Leonard, the fellow, Harry Leonard is this fellow, I think. I'm looking at it backwards. No, he's this fellow. This is Spencer Penrose. Harry Leonard and Spencer Penrose became lifelong friends. Says Harry Leonard, now head of the Colorado Rock Drill Company, occupied the cabin with them, and he and Penrose are standing in front. Tethered to the woodpile is the white horse that Penrose rode for a long time and of which he became very fond. He recalls that he paid only $25 for the animal. This is a pony he called Rabbit, and he could always be found in Cripple Creek because Rabbit would be tied up out front wherever he'd gone inside, so people knew how to find him. Tutt and Penrose had previously opened offices in Colorado Springs. So my theory on this is that Harry Leonard and Spencer Penrose were the real occupants of the cabin because Charles Tutt was married at the time. He had settled down and gotten married and had children and lived in Colorado Springs. So although he may have stayed in Cripple Creek from time to time, he wasn't really living there, and that's probably why he wanted somebody reliable to run his businesses up there. Now, I acquired this picture rather recently, and the reason it caught my attention is because I've seen no less than 3 cabins that are totally different that claim they were the first cabin in Cripple Creek. And this is one of them. But another thing that's interesting about this picture is the street scene. Obviously very crowded, a dirt road, a lot of dirt, a lot of noise, and there's a tripod right in the middle. So somebody's taking pictures of all of this busy activity going on. Spencer Penrose was very much a publicist, and he invited photographers to come out to Cripple Creek and take pictures of what was going on so he could take them back to Eastern newspapers and lure Eastern investors to invest in some of the mining claims and land transactions that were going on. So here is a picture of the Tutt and Penrose offices. It says Tutt and Penrose right here. Cripple Creek Town Supplies, something or another, real estate, mines, and milling. Penrose is the gentleman right here. I don't see Tutt in this picture. So this was used as publicity to show that there was a lot of business going on in Cripple Creek. Now, the other picture is a mural on the wall in the Will Rogers Shrine of the Sun, which Spencer Penrose built. And it's a similar picture of men doing business in Cripple Creek, obviously a painting, more of a fanciful picture. But if you compare the building with the building here, you'll see the features are identical. The sign up here says Tutt and Penrose. Real estate mines and so forth on the sign up there. And we see Penrose and Tutt right here in the background of the picture. So if you're ever up in the shrine, when your visitors come and you're out sightseeing, take a look at this beautiful mural and you'll know the background of it. Here's another publicity picture that was sent back east. And in the background, you'll see a sample of an actual invoice from the Cripple Creek Sampling and Ore Company, which was run by Charles Tutt, President, and Spencer Penrose, Secretary and Treasurer. And here they are in this picture, Penrose and Tutt. So they were all over the place, and they were really working on publicizing not only what was going on in Cripple Creek, but also what their business was doing. They found out early on they owned a mine called the COD mine, which stood for Cash on Delivery. And they found out quickly that all of the mining concerns up in Cripple Creek needed to have milling operations in order to mill their ore. So why not provide that? Find a need and fill it. And so they did. And they were becoming rich. In the meantime, they sold the COD mine for a considerable increase in money. And it was about the time that there was a silver crash in 1893, and the COD mine had a vein of gold that was producing. So they were able to sell the mine for a large profit. Unfortunately for the new owners, the vein of gold played out very shortly after they bought it. So they did very well on that transaction. In the meantime, Penrose had a mining engineer named Daniel C. Jackling, who suggested that he had a way of milling copper ore so that the low-grade ore in copper mining could be further processed, and a lot of precious ore that was being tossed aside could be sold and larger profits made. So Penrose started looking around at mines, and the one that caught his eye was the Utah copper mine in Bingham Canyon outside of Salt Lake City, about 30 miles away from Salt Lake City. And so he consulted with his brother Richard, who was the geologist, the mineral engineer, and his brother said, "This sounds like a good idea. It sounds like it could work." So he and his associates purchased the Utah copper mine. And again, there was a legend that Penrose became very wealthy through his mining concerns in Cripple Creek. The real fortune came after he started dealing with copper and the Utah copper mine, which eventually he sold to Kennecott Copper. And that's where his fortune multiplied and multiplied, and he became a very wealthy man. About this time, Charles Tutt was backing off of some of his business concerns because he was worried about his health. He had heart trouble and wasn't working as much in business. It was also in the early 1900s that Spencer Penrose met a beautiful widow named Julie Mcmillan, and she came to Colorado Springs initially because her husband, James Mcmillan, had TB, and as many people did, they came out so they could find the cure for his TB. Unfortunately, he succumbed to it, and the tragedy doubled when she lost her son, who had appendicitis only a month before her husband died. That left her with a daughter who was going into her teenage years to raise, and she was very distraught over her situation. Fortunately, she was wealthy to begin with, so she didn't have that concern, but she was not a part of the social scene of Colorado Springs for a few years. Before her husband died, the Cheyenne Mountain Country Club had a barbecue to entertain some of the women who were caretakers for TB patients. Of course, she was one of those, and so she went to the barbecue, and one of the hosts of the barbecue was Spencer Penrose. So she met him there, and they had some conversation, but then she disappeared for a few years after that. When they ran into each other again, they discovered they liked some of the same activities. They enjoyed lively conversation and hospitality and travel and many of the same things. So now you have to understand, Spencer Penrose by this time was in his 40s, and his father, who was a rather overbearing gentleman, insisted on approving of his son's girlfriends. So they had to go through a situation of his brothers saying, yes, she's okay, she's not going to steal the family fortune, it's all right, and this sort of thing. She's a upstanding lady and all that. So they went through that, and he finally received a letter from his father saying, yes, I approve, it's okay, you can go forward with this situation. They made a beeline to London and got married. Oh, I'll back up again. This is a page actually from a Vogue magazine of the era, and it caught my eye because the Cadillac is identical to one Spencer Penrose bought for Julie for one of their wedding or anniversary presents. So she brought the Vogue to the partnership. It's part of the title. He had so many things going on. He was just trying different things to see what worked, see what didn't. And as I said before, he was a wannabe cowboy, really. So he bought a ranch, Turkey Creek Ranch, which is now a part of Fort Carson. Some of the buildings are still there and are used. They're empty buildings or else used for recreation centers and a variety of things. But in its prime, he was attempting to make a ranch that could be a model ranch for agriculture in the region, livestock and that sort of thing. He imported cattle and livestock to the ranch and used it for a retreat, but it never made much money. So after several years, he kind of backed off of the ranching and eventually sold it. So at this time, he decided to stay closer to home. He was settling down into married life, and so his focus switched to Colorado Springs to the benefit of the Pikes Peak area. One of his purchases in 1915 was the Manitou Incline Railway. He called these attractions that he started up funiculars. And he wanted to have fun things that would attract tourists and bring people out to the Pikes Peak region. And you'll see why in a few minutes. So this first picture is what the Manitou Incline looked like around 1910. The train that they used to take tourists up was an old construction cart that was used to take pipes up Manitou Mountain. And it was a rickety thing and kind of dangerous, but people really liked the view, so they actually paid to ride it. So by about 1918 or 1920, after Penrose bought it, the top building station, they called it, had burned once, and he rebuilt it. He rebuilt the carts so they were sturdier, made them safer after a fashion. And this is what it looked like. So it was a grand adventure for people to ride up Mount Manitou. Also about this time, he decided to build a road up Pikes Peak. So there was a trail up Pikes Peak. It was a carriage trail, and of course, you could ride the cog railway, which was in use, and ride burros up, that sort of thing. But for the new automobile traffic, people were actually buying automobiles by this time. They'd been introduced for several years, but people were actually able to buy automobiles, and they needed a place to drive them. So he thought, why not build a road up Pikes Peak? And people loved it. So this is what it looked like at the time. And by 1916, he decided to start the Pikes Peak Hill Climb, Race to the Clouds, and he put a silver trophy called the Penrose Trophy up for the winner. The first winner of the Pikes Peak Hill Climb was a young fellow named Ria Lentz. He drove a car that was called the Romano Special, which was a hybrid car basically built on an airplane engine, and he drove the road in 22 minutes. And he was the first winner. Now, he was a young fellow. He was about 22 years old. And after he won the race, they never saw him again. He didn't come back to the race again and kind of dropped out of the picture. So after 1916, the country went into the World War I era, and the race did not take place again until 1920. In 1920, the race was won by this gentleman. His name was Otto Lohse, and the other fellow is his mechanic, because the drivers were allowed to take their mechanic with them for those moments when the car broke down. They would jump out and get out some tools and fix it, jump back in, and continue the race. So here they are doing a press photo in front of the Lexington store because they have a Lexington car. So this was a big success, and he won the race in 1920. The trouble is, the Penrose Trophy was a revolving trophy. Once you won it, you took it for a year and then returned it for the next person. The only way to retire the trophy was to win the race twice. And Penrose thought, well, that's not going to happen. Otto Lohse came back in 1924 and won it again. So he retired the trophy. So they had to order a new one, and they did. And then there was the Broadmoor. So all along, Penrose had his sights on the Broadmoor. He'd made a small attempt to buy the Antlers Hotel, thinking he'd buy it for a lowball price and then fix it up, which was his style. But that didn't work out, so he set his sights on this aging casino. In fact, the press called this casino a sunny place full of shady people. And this is what the Broadmoor looked like when it was a casino. In fact, this building was used for many years as the golf house for the modern-day Broadmoor Golf Club, and was torn down in 1994 or 97, I forget which. Spencer and Julie Penrose moved into El Pomar, which was an estate within walking distance from the Broadmoor. And this was a huge mansion, 87 rooms, on a large estate with gardens and walking trails, and to this day there are deer wandering in the lawn and this sort of thing on the lawn, and fountains. It's a beautiful place. Again, he bought it for even then it was $70,000, which wasn't that huge a price for the amount of property that he acquired. And for another $5,000, he was able to buy all the antique furnishings and artwork that were in the mansion. So it is still there to this day, and the El Pomar Foundation, which he and Julie Penrose started, use it for a conference center and kind of a headquarters. And this is a picture of them walking in the gardens with their dog. So he rebuilt the Broadmoor Hotel. I acquired this image recently, and it interested me because the postmark it's a postcard, and the postmark is dated 1918, which means the picture was taken right after the construction was finished on the original Broadmoor Hotel building. In fact, it appears that it's not quite finished at the top. I'm not sure about that, but this is very close to being one of the first actual photos of the Broadmoor Hotel after it was finished. Julie Penrose was busy as well. She had become a devout Catholic after her husband died, and during World War I, her daughter, who was married to a Belgian man, was in Belgium with her daughter, and the family was detained, and Julie prayed and said that if the young family got safely out of Belgium during World War I and was able to come back, that she would build a chapel and name it after her granddaughter, which she did. So that's where the beautiful Pauline Chapel across the street from the Broadmoor came from. This is a picture of Will Rogers, who was a famous comic and entertainer and humorist during the time. And he wasn't, people think that he was a friend of Spencer Penrose's, and he liked to claim that, I think, but he only visited the Broadmoor Hotel once. But part of the reason that he came was that he was a polo player, and Penrose was trying to promote the game of polo at the Broadmoor Hotel to encourage polo teams to come. He was always thinking of ways to bring in tourists and guests to the Broadmoor, that sort of thing. And this is Will Rogers on his favorite polo pony, Bootlegger. Oh yes, we're into the 1920s now, which most of you know was Prohibition time, 1920 through 1933. So Spencer Penrose started the Broadmoor Polo Club in 1922, and about that time the U.S. Army Remount Service put their Rocky Mountain headquarters in the Broadmoor stables. The Remount Service was a group that wanted to encourage equine sports and the training of saddle horses to have a good supply in case there was ever a need for saddle horses in the Army. They discovered it during World War I that there was a shortage because all of a sudden America had automobiles and horses were not so much a focus anymore, and there weren't enough saddle horses that were well trained for the Army. So that's one of the reasons that equine sports became so important at the time. And of course, there is no polo at the Broadmoor anymore, and there were endurance rides and endurance races, and those no longer take place there either. So that's a part of Pikes Peak Region history that has become very important, and then gone by the wayside. So Spencer Penrose apparently liked to build roads up mountains because he decided to build another one. This time he built a road up Cheyenne Mountain. It wasn't quite as long, it was 9 miles instead of 18. But by this time it also cost more money, $350,000 instead of $250,000. And as usual, he wasn't getting very many investors, so it was kind of up to him to take care of this. At the top, he built a lodge so that people could come up and enjoy the view. And inside the lodge, he had a large meeting room with animal heads in it. Now, I heard this rather wild story that he enjoyed having people come to the lodge for cocktail parties. And after a while, the people would be looking around at the animal heads, and an animal head would start talking to them. And I thought, this is kind of wild, I don't know about this one. Well, lo and behold, I found this photograph of the inside of the Cheyenne Lodge, and I thought, well, there they are. There are the animal heads. And apparently somewhere in the warehouses around the Broadmoor, there is an animal head with wires attached to it so that the mouth can go up and down and this sort of thing. So you can make your own conclusion on that. Penrose purchased the Pikes Peak Cog Railway in 1925. Again, this is how he rolled. He built the Pikes Peak Highway, which siphoned automobile traffic, tourist traffic, into automobile traffic up the road from the Cog Railway. It started losing money. So he bought it for a low-ball price, restored the engines and the trains, and started taking tourists up the Cog Railway again, and it started making a profit. So he was a shrewd businessman. And in that regard, here's one of his little stunts that he pulled. This is an elephant. If you can see it, it's a little dark, but there's an elephant standing here. And on the side of this boxcar, it says, "This car contains the Empress of India, the largest elephant in the world. Gift of the Raja of Nagpur to Spencer Penrose, Broadmoor Hotel, Colorado Springs." At every little whistle stop, they would bring the elephant out, and everybody would see this sign going, "Oh, wow, look what they have in Colorado Springs. I want to go to Colorado Springs and get a better look at this elephant." The elephant was really named Tessie, and she was a renegade elephant from an Arkansas circus that needed a home. So Spencer Penrose took her in and decided to take full advantage of the situation. Tessie settled in at the Broadmoor rather happily and came out for photo opportunities and greeting visitors at the Broadmoor. Spencer Penrose did like his exotic pets, and although it became a little bit of a problem, for instance, with Tessie wandering around the grounds and the golf course, the groundskeepers took a dim view of this, so for a variety of reasons. Big footprints, right? He had monkeys and camels and that sort of thing, and needed a place for them. Well, he had this road up Cheyenne Mountain. Why not build a zoo on the road, and tourists could go up Cheyenne Mountain Road to the zoo? And so that was opened in 1926. His pets became the first residents of the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, which is world famous today, of course. Now, when he built that road, people would say, "Spencer, why are you building another road up a mountain?" He said, "Because I want to get on top." Obviously, he had other ideas. He and Julie also did quite a bit of traveling. This is a passport renewal application with their pictures on it. They traveled to Europe, and Julie was especially helpful in purchasing antiques and art for the Broadmoor. And so they went to Europe, they had a house in Hawaii, and did quite a bit of traveling, and of course it was all on steamship. So by the 1930s, Spencer and Julie Penrose were starting to think about what to do with their riches. And they established the Elpamar Foundation, which has made millions of dollars bequests in grants to nonprofits and so forth to help Colorado and Colorado Springs. Spencer Penrose had a kind of a scare in 1931. They discovered he had cancer in his esophagus and operated on it and thought they took care of it, but the fear of that lingered with him. And he started thinking about this shrine that he wanted to build, this medieval shrine, and started making plans for it. It would be up Cheyenne Mountain Road above the zoo. So he made plans to build the shrine when, in 1935, Will Rogers was killed in a tragic airplane crash. And they decided to call it the Will Rogers Shrine of the Sun and dedicate it to him. They thought that would be more appropriate than making it just a family shrine. And again, this could be a tourist attraction where people could go up the mountain and enjoy the beautiful views from there. This is a picture of Penrose's bust, which is on the grounds of the shrine down about here. And if you look beyond it, you can see the plains behind the bust and the type of view that you have up there if you've never been. This is a publicity photo for the Will Rogers Rodeo in 1937. To my knowledge, I have never seen this photo before in the Pikes Peak region, and I'm very happy that I was able to acquire it online so that I can share it with the people of the Pikes Peak region. It's in the book. This is the Will Rogers Stadium. Again, he dedicated this to Will Rogers in 1938. And here we have two fellows dressed up in their cowboy outfits. It's Spencer Penrose and Harry Leonard. Remember the fellow outside the cabin in Cripple Creek? They're still buddies. And they were involved in doing publicity for the rodeo. So after the rodeo started, or the first rodeo in the new stadium, there was an announcement, and it was told that Spencer Penrose had decided to donate the Shrine of the Sun, the zoo, and the rodeo stadium to the city of Colorado Springs, the people of Colorado Springs. And there was a stunned silence. People could not believe that he would actually donate all of that to Colorado Springs, which he did, and so much more. So this is what happened when he died in 1939. He was 74 years old, and the shrine was built, and there was a family chapel in the basement of it where his ashes were buried. After he passed away, Julie decided to make a donation of $3.2 million to the Glockner Sanitarium in Colorado Springs. This is a picture of it. You can see there's an automobile here and a horse carriage here. So we're still in crossover mode at this time, changing from automobiles or from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. And so she built the Penrose Tower for doing cancer research at the Glockner Sanitarium. It then became Penrose Hospital. Julie Penrose died after a productive life on her own. She had continued as president of the Broadmoor and of the El Pomar Foundation, and also El Pomar Investments, in addition to her philanthropy projects and cultural concerns. Her body was buried in the family chapel below the Shrine of the Sun. This is a picture of her as a mature woman with her little dog Pitty Pat that she never went out without. I was surprised to learn about this beautiful statue in America the Beautiful Park. I lived in Colorado Springs from 1974 to 1992, so this appeared after I left. I didn't know about it. And it's dedicated to Julie Penrose. There's a very nice plaque that explains all that about Julie Penrose. And this is what the Broadmoor looks like today. There have been several restorations. multi-million-dollar restorations to make it beautiful and to refurbish it and make it the centerpiece for Colorado Springs and the Pikes Peak area that it always has been, still receiving 5 stars, I believe, from the Michelin Guide, or Michelin, I think. And if you're fortunate to go in and wander around the Broadmoor Hotel, there's a lot to see. For instance, this is Bottle Alley on the left. There are many old, dusty wine bottles there with autographs of people who had imbibed in their contents. And it's like a history museum of wine bottles. On the right, there's a mural that shows some of the fun and interesting things that were going on in the area during the time the Penroses lived there. And in this car, there's you can see his hat, his Penrose's hat, and a flask, and a picnic basket, and people playing polo and racing airplanes and all sorts of activities. And of course, there's the statue, which is at Pikes Peak in Tejon. Not quite as obtrusive as Palmer's on his horse, but that's probably a good thing, right? And it's really an honor to be able to bring Penrose's story back to Penrose Library. How cool is that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Joyce also has, in addition to the book that we have available that Clausen Books is selling, Joyce has several of her own titles that are available, and I'm sure she'd be pleased to sign those. We have authors who are here who are published in Bigwigs and Benefactors. Can you raise your hands? So these are the folks you want to have sign your books as well. And so we have tables set up in the Aspen and Pine rooms to have some refreshments and get your book signed. I do want to mention, you don't have to buy a book. We have the books available in the library for checkout. They can be downloaded through Overdrive. If you're interested in ebooks, we have a coupon that you can pick up at our reference desk, which is just out this door, make a U-turn, come in the door, and it's at the end of our history desk. And these are instructions on how to download a free copy of an EPUB through Smashwords. And so we really want to get this information out. Thank you so much, Joyce. This is always a lot of fun. What I really enjoy about Joyce's presentations and her research is she really does a good job of going through the legends to find the truth. And that's a quality of a great historian and a good journalist. And so I want to give you another hand for that. So Joyce has presented at many of our Pikes Peak Regional History Symposia. And this year's symposium, I would like to invite you all to. It's called Enduring Legacies and Forgotten Landmarks, the Built Environment of the Pikes Peak Region. And it's about architects, architecture, the environment. It's on June 10th, which is a Saturday, so it's coming up pretty soon. It's at the East Library. It's an all-day event. This will be our 14th. It's a whole lot of fun. We do require reservations, but it's at no cost. We feed you free lunch. So there's really no reason for you not to want to go. Now, there's other reasons. The reason it's free, we're very grateful to the contributions from the Friends of the Pikes Peak Library District, the Pikes Peak Library District Foundation, and to Helen McCaffrey, who has supported the symposium for many years. And I want to thank them for their support. Now, there's another reason to go to the symposium. Helen and her late husband, James, contributed several important things to Pikes Peak Library District, and one of those is photographs that they took of buildings, many of which were scheduled to be demolished. And so they have before and after photographs. So you see the beautiful Chief Theater Do any of you remember the Chief Theater? Quite a few of you. And then the photograph after it was torn down, and it's now a parking lot. So it's a very striking exhibit of photographs that we have that are curated by Bill Thomas that are on exhibit outside the room where we have the symposium at the East Library. And this exhibit will go on from June 1st through June 30th. So if you can't make it to the symposium, you can still drop by to see these great photographs, which we're very grateful to have. If you can't make it to the symposium, we're also streaming it live on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Pikes Peak Library District, no spaces, and you can watch it in real time. Let's see what else we've got here. I do want to thank Jamie Hastings and Ralph Giordano. They do the videography of all of our events. This way we have it available for people to watch on the Pikes Peak Library District's Channel 17 PPLD TV. You can watch it streaming online. We also turn these things into podcasts. Every third Thursday you can get the Pikes Peak Past Cast. So if you subscribe to that, you would have gotten your past cast this morning. My phone went off about 6 a.m. I haven't listened to it yet, I must admit. But so please join us for refreshments and books just down the stairs. Keep walking, you'll hit the Pine Room. And thank you for attending.